Welcome to this web training on basic board responsibilities. If you're a first-time board member, we will cover the basics about this vital job that you have just committed yourself to. If you're an experienced board member, this web training will review with you the parameters of your role as a board member to your organization. Though it's very reminiscent of the relationship between a dog and its master, all nonprofit boards have three main responsibilities to their nonprofit organization: the duty of obedience, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of care. And let's review what I mean about each one of those. What do I mean about the duty of obedience? It means that you must know what your organization's core mission is, and that mission should be in your mind at all times and guide all your governance decisions. Every decision you make sitting on the board should work to fulfill the mission of your organization. The board's job is to govern the life of the organization. It's your ultimate responsibility, and you are the ones held accountable to the public trust. You need to be sure that your organization functions within the law on all federal, state, and local matters, and according to its own bylaws. Your organization will not maintain its tax-free status if necessary governmental filings are not made in a timely fashion. Your director and staff should be responsible for this, but you have every right to ask to be informed about these filings. Some small nonprofits without a director are relying on board members to take care of this task. Do you know what a 990 is? It's the federal tax return that every nonprofit must file annually with the federal government. In PA, an annual application must be filed with the Bureau of Charitable Organizations also. And you should receive a copy of your organization's bylaws when you join the board. Actually read them and make sure the board abides by them. Now let's talk about the duty of loyalty to your organization. It is imperative that you, as a board member, avoid any conflict of interest or even perceived conflicts of interest during your service to the organization. As a board member, you, and that includes your friends, family, business, cannot profit from your association with your organization. If there is even a perception of a conflict of interest, you should recuse yourself from any board discussions on that matter to protect the integrity of the organization. This may mean you literally get up and leave the room for that part of the board discussion and/or vote on a particular matter. Unlike the for-profit world, which typically compensates their board members, you cannot be compensated for your volunteer service on the board. That is a huge difference between for-profit and nonprofit boards. You should be asked on an annual basis to fill out and sign a conflict of interest document, which is kept on file with the organization. I'd like to introduce you to a new term that the IRS uses now, and that's the term independent. On the new 990s, the IRS requires the number of independent voting members of the governing body to be counted. There's a long list of questions you must answer to determine if you are truly independent. You may have 20 board members and only 18 are verifiable as independent. That's okay with the IRS. They just need a count. If you have a family member working for the organization, you're not truly independent. If you own a company that's doing business with the organization, you are not independent. Doesn't mean that you can't serve on the board. It just means as far as the IRS is concerned, you're not independent. In the supplemental materials for this training is a sample board independence survey, as well as a sample conflict of interest form. And you are welcome to download them to your computer and then look at them. Two other points about your duty of loyalty. What is discussed in board meetings should remain confidential. This allows for trust to develop among board members. And the second point is in times of crisis for your organization, and believe me, these things come up unexpectedly, plan ahead for a single voice to be the spokesperson for your organization. This could be the executive director or someone from the board, but all public questions should be directed to this designated person so the organization is speaking with one message. Board members who take their fight into the public arena can be very destructive for your agency. An example of this might be if an individual board member who doesn't agree with the board's majority vote on an issue writes a letter to the editor contrary to the board's position. This is very destructive to both their organization, and it's a violation of your duty of loyalty. The bottom line for every board member is that you are ultimately responsible for the management and oversight of your organization. Where does the buck stop? It stops with the board. So make sure that fiscal controls are in place. Ask questions and don't assume that other board members have this aspect of management under control. They might be assuming that you're doing it for them. At each meeting, you should be reviewing and approving the minutes from the previous meeting. Take the time to read those minutes and make sure they're accurate and reflect what occurred. Never hesitate to raise questions. It's your responsibility to have all your questions answered and to understand the dealing of the organization you are in charge of. It's not only your right to question, it's your responsibility. As a board member, you're not individually liable unless you have in fact committed fraud. But you should ask for proof that your organization has a directors and officers insurance policy known as D&O insurance. If your organization doesn't have D&O insurance, you better get it immediately or decide not to serve. My last point is a crucial one. A nonprofit board is a team approach. No one board member should act for the organization or direct its affairs unless given authority to do so from the group. You have a collective role, not an individual one. The board can only govern as a group, making policy decisions and holding formal discussions during a board meeting. If decisions are being made by two board members talking in the parking lot, you have a problem. Believe it or not, nonprofits go through organizational life stages just like humans do. If you're joining the board of a nonprofit in its infancy, you could be facing an interesting challenge. Often nonprofits are founded by a single founder or leader who staffs their initial board with friends who are content to just follow this visionary leader. They have a minimal role, and the board initially just acts as cheerleaders and rubber stampers. Nonprofits operating in this way risk violating their accountability to the public. It is important for the life of the nonprofit that they move quickly past this rubber stamping stage and bring on board members who will question, challenge, and move past the founder's individual vision and authority. New board members willing to buck the pattern and bring the board into working for a community vision of their organization are worth their weight in gold. In the supplemental materials attached to this training is a chart of organizational life cycle stages, which is worth looking at. And I'd ask you to question yourself, where does your organization fall? It's been mentioned before, but get a copy of the bylaws and read them. It's important for board members to learn and know what their organization is committing to. Knowing where your organization's revenues are coming from is crucial. You should be aware of any contracts or agreements involving income and what funders expect in return. Typically, your organization's staff and director will handle these responsibilities, but you should be informed. Remember, the buck stops with the board. You have to know the key contracts and the terms of these major contracts. Never allow a grant to be misused. Your organization is in trouble if you're juggling funds from a restricted account for a specific purpose to cover expenses from some other account. This is a list of a basics of what you should have received upon joining your board. You should absolutely have a copy of the mission statement, and it's helpful to have a history of the organization. You should have a copy of the latest bylaws, the annual budget for your organization, the audited financial statements, and the latest IRS Form 990. Reading the 990 will really tell you a lot about your organization. Description of board member duties, a schedule for the year of your board member meetings so you can get it on your personal calendars, a list of board committees if there are any, what their charges are, and who the other members are, the last annual report if your agency produces one, and a list of the programs that the organization runs. So if you don't have any of these basic pieces of information that you should have been given when you joined the board, ask for them. You have 4 fiduciary responsibilities. These are what the public is entrusting you with as a board member of a tax-exempt nonprofit organization. You have to manage with integrity at all times in the public interest. You have to take into account, account to official bodies, and that's federal, state, local, and to the public about the actions taken and how the funds are being used. You have to oversee management of any endowment funds. More established nonprofits have started endowments. It helps with sustainability. You might not have any, but if you do, you need to oversee the management of them. And manage funds in accordance with the mission statement of your organization. Remember, at all times in the back of your head, you're keeping track of what the mission of your organization is. You can't perform your governance or fiduciary responsibilities to your organization without seeing reports as regular intervals at board meetings throughout the year. Hopefully your organization holds board meetings at least 4 times a year at the bare minimum. At them, you should see, without fail, a written agenda, minutes from the previous meeting to be approved, a financial report covering the previous period, and a budget versus actual. A budget paper that tells you are expenses on track, or did something unusual happen, and there should be an explanation at that board meeting if there are any variances in that. And there will be, but the explanation is necessary. Your board treasurer has an additional role. At a very minimum, they should also see bank reconciliations with the original bank statements and expenses with documentation attached to it, such as a receipt that explains the payment. So the full board and the treasurer, if you don't see some of these things, you need to ask for them and demand that they be presented at every board meeting. I wanted to give you a look at what a monthly treasurer's report might look like. This is very bare bones, but it is giving you your current balances, the receivables, and it gives you a quick overview of all your budget and where you are year to date in that budget. So on your treasurer monthly reports, do they follow month to month? You should be able to compare this. Are changes in balances being understood by you all? And are expenses part of the budget or otherwise explained somewhere? We've looked at your board responsibilities from several angles. Your responsibilities toward your organization, that's the duty of obedience, loyalty, and care, just think dog, and your fiduciary responsibilities on behalf of the public. Now let's look at your functional responsibilities concerning your organization's staff. For those of you that do employ an executive director, and there are some small nonprofits that do not, and the board must do these duties. But if you employ an executive director, you need to provide support to the executive director. And don't micromanage his or her job. You need to make sure you're evaluating their performance at least annually, and if necessary, terminating their employment. And the board does act as the final arbiter in all internal disputes among staff. A nonprofit doesn't last long if your mission and activities are not public knowledge. You need to have a communication plan. You need to define and communicate the organization's objectives and policies and standards to be met to the public. And we do recommend having an annual report. Is there an annual report created each year for your organization? If you don't do one, it might be a good idea to start. And you have to consider how is it going to be disseminated to stakeholders and to the public. Financial oversight is a huge job for the board. We've already mentioned this responsibility throughout the training. This isn't just the job of one person on the board. You are all ultimately responsible for the finances. You must educate yourself and be knowledgeable about your organization's finances. Again, don't assume, oh, somebody else is handling this for us. It is your responsibility. So to ensure the financial welfare of this organization that you're directing, you need to raise the funds needed to meet the budgetary requirements. You need to make sure that you are securing and investing and preserving all the financial assets. You need to inspect and approve budgets that prudently support the goals of the organization. And you do need to fundraise. You need to support all the fundraising. So board members, it may be something you hate, but you will have to fundraise. Lastly, the board plays a huge role in fostering positive community relations for your organization. You, as a board member, are key in promoting your organization to the public. If no one knows you're a board member of an organization, you're not doing your job. They need to know that you're involved in this organization, and you should be touting that proudly. You need to foster positive community relations by promoting the mission and the programs of your organization. And you're trying to strengthen and broaden the community support. You should be recruiting new members of the community to serve the organization as volunteers or board members. And is there an annual report? Is there a communication plan? I wanted to talk briefly about something that is critical for the success of your organization, and that's term limits. We strongly advise and advocate term limits for all board members and officers. Term limits of 2 to 4 years with an option of a second term maybe will allow board members to recognize that they aren't signing up for life. Term limits force an organization to constantly look for new blood to keep it vibrant. So if your organization doesn't already have term limits, you should bring up the issue at the next board meeting. Having just told you that there should be term limits, there's also a place for past board members and key persons in the history of your organization. So mindful with this need for continuity and a sense of history, you could form an honorary advisory board. It's sometimes called an emeritus board. And this advisory or an emeritus board, it absolutely must be non-voting. Their purpose is to act as a resource and advice-giving body, but they do not officially vote. And the makeup of who would be on your advisory board can be done any way that the board decides. So thank you for your attention during this training. United Way of Southern Chester County is here to help you. Please contact us if you need some personalized coaching on anything that's been discussed in this presentation. Peruse the supplemental documents attached to the web training, and then go forth and be the best board member you can be.